Monday. Hey, happy Monday to you folks. Thank you for joining me for episode 179 of Soapbox Daily. I'm your host, Matt Morgan, and how are you doing on this Monday? How was your weekend? Was it a good weekend or did it breeze on by? I don't know. I was hoping that spring was around the corner when it came to the weekend, but I woke up this morning to snow. Although the weather was quite spring-like yesterday, it's just interesting how the weather seems to work lately. So today on episode 179 on this Monday of Soapbox Daily, what are we discussing? Well, here's the thing. I like to get retro once in a while. And, I have the availability to do that because there's so many streaming services out there. There's so much TV on demand. There's so much everything on demand these days that you can just get an idea of, hey, I want to see this, and you could find it. Interestingly enough, once in a while, I'll be scrolling through some of the actual channels and options and everything else I have with so many streaming services, and I found some gems, some really good gems. So here's what we're discussing today. We'll get into this first. 80s TV was just so much more wholesome. I know, good English on me, eh? But that's our topic for today. 80s TV was just so much more wholesome. And before we get into that, hey, how was your integrity? Speaking of wholesomeness, how was your integrity this weekend? Were you doing the right thing? Were you setting the positive example? Trying to make the world a better place, folks. Domino effect. Do the right thing when no one else is watching. Let's make this world the best it can be. So let's get into this. And I guess what inspired this was I found an old show. Once in a while I find some old shows and I revisit them, some of which I've been a little disappointed by, but I visited an old show called Doogie Howser MD. And if you know anything about that, Neil Patrick Harris from, I guess most people will know him from a few movies and some other stuff, but I think most of people these days know him from How I Met Your Mother. But it was, I like the actor, he was a good actor, but I started watching this because I was like, okay, well, I'm going to revisit some of these shows. And some, as I said, were disappointing, some not so disappointing. Like I visited the Muppets recently and I wasn't too impressed by that, but I started watching Doogie Howser MD, a few episodes, and I'm going to say it's, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that era of TV. But what I found was interesting about the 80s TV was you could usually get an idea of how the TV felt, like how the show was going to be based on the lighting. Like for instance, if you saw the lighting was super bright, you know it was over the top fictional and just outrageous. Like some of those teenage, like for instance, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and also Saved by the Bell. Look at the lighting on those shows. It's way bright and you just know it's corny and cheesy and so far from not the truth, it's unbelievable. But then you look at your average blah lighting. I guess that's the only way to describe it, your average blah lighting, which I found shows like Doogie Howser MD and also shows like Cheers and a bunch of other shows. I'll go over a list of some shows from back then, but they were more realistic, more down to earth, more, I don't know, they just seem more real. I'll give you some ideas. Magnum PI, the A-Team. I know some of you remember some of these shows. Family Ties, The Dukes of Hazzard, Happy Days, Married with Children, Quantum Leap, Night Court. I can go on and on and on. But you got some shows that were darker. So you can usually get an idea. If it was super bright, oh yeah, Growing Pains is another super bright one. It was a little more content that was more realistic and dealt with world issues. But you go through all this and I don't know. Some of the I've visited, I'm like revisited, and I'm like, well, why did I watch that? Like, for instance, MacGyver. The original MacGyver, I like Richard Dean Anderson. He's really excellent. I love him as an actor, but the original MacGyver series was pretty cheesy. It really was. Really bad acting, in my opinion. But when I was a kid, I didn't know any better. Look at Knight Rider. I liked the fact that Knight Rider was what it was, but it was cheesy acting as well. But okay, so let's get back on topic here. Why I found it to be more wholesome when it came to 80s TV. Now, as I said, not everything was. And they did a lot of shows, not a lot of shows, but there are some shows that really hit some real world stuff in a real world way. And some of the stuff was shocking. Some of the stuff we didn't want to be reminded of. Some of the stuff we really didn't find, well, we kind of find it a little disturbing. But I mean, other stuff was right on the mark and something that we could probably use today as far as the lessons that were being taught, especially those teenage shows around teenage years that I think still hold valuable lessons today that our teenagers could use. The lessons learned in them. For instance, Doogie Howser MD. Out of the first 6-7 episodes that I watched, I'm like, you know what? This is pretty straightforward to the point and no holds barred, not scare tactic, but it holds explanation of things, which I think is a good example if any teenager took heed to. Because I found going from 80s TV into 90s, 90s TV became more sensational. I found it became more sensational, more over the top, kind of escalating teenagers growing up, getting into adult stuff quicker. Now, was that the realism of the world? No, I'm not going to say across the board it was, because I honestly think the outcome that happens with your kids is based on your efficiency as a parent and what you do as a parent and how you teach and raise your kids as a parent. You can only get so much from TV to try to help give a nudge, but I think at the end of the day, it's the parenting that is done at home by one parent or two parents or wherever the case may be, which actually helps define how your kids end up. Although 80s TV tried to assist this process and set good examples and set good lessons to learn in life, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how the parenting went at home. Some of these shows were really well done. I will have to agree. And I'm quoting Doogie Howser because I've been watching that one recently. But there's some other stuff, other shows that were pretty realistic. Some were close to it, like Who's the Boss wasn't bad. Growing Pains wasn't bad. The Wonder Years was pretty good. And I know I'm focusing on the teenage dramas, the teenage lessons of the facts of life was another one. Let's see, what else do we got here? Boom, boom, boom. Different Strokes was kind of ahead of its time, in my opinion. What else do we got? Jeez, we had a lot of TV back in the 80s, didn't we? I'm going through this listing. But there's a lot of good shows. In fact, then Full House is another one. There's a lot of good shows that people might say in today's era, oh, they're cheesy and everything else, and they're corny. No, actually, they're not. Their lessons are pretty simplistic and innocent to the point. And if you really open your mind to realize the message that's being conveyed, I think it's a good lesson for kids and for young adults growing up. But that's just my viewpoint. I think 80s TV was quite wholesome. And when I look at 90s TV, I find it's just making too sensationalized, and I think it's racing kids way too quick. Don't even get me started on what started happening in the 2000s. But my vote is definitely 80s TV was probably some of the best TV that was out there because it was real and to the point. It had a lot of excitement. It had a lot of flair. It set the benchmark for a lot of TV moving forward. I mean, where is you going to find an amazing show like Cheers? I mean, that was like an excellent show. I just finished watching all the episodes. I went a marathon for well over a year watching them. But you won't find TV like that anymore. The TV these days is just disposable. But back in the 80s, oh, what it hit home with was just great. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I encourage you to revisit some of the 80s TV with an open mind, and you might actually agree with me. But either way, I'd like to hear your viewpoints. If you want, over on Twitter at @Soapbox, send me a DM, share your thoughts, share me a tweet, or send me an email. You can do all that, all our contact information over at themadmorgan.com. Yes, themadmorgan.com, which is our central website for everything, with all our podcasts and projects and shows from now on into the future. 80s TV, I think it was more wholesome. I've read some forums and some arguments and everything else from others objecting to this, but hey, it's my viewpoint. That's what I'm thinking. Anyways, I'm your host, Matt Morgan. Thanks for tuning in this Monday. I hope you have an amazing Monday moving forward. Always appreciate you being here. Have a great Monday, and I will see you tomorrow for our next episode.